We can pursue deeper alliances with stable democracies when the United States played a predominant role. That predominance is a thing of the past. This is a profound thing for a Canadian Prime Minister to say in a speech. When we distanced ourselves from the United Kingdom and developed closer ties with the United States, Canada's defence spending fell to less than 1% of GDP. And so, for all those reasons, I'm announcing today that you didn't hear this on CNN, you didn't read it in the headlines. But last week, something massive shifted in global politics, and it's going to directly challenge America's place in the world. Not with missiles, not with tanks, but with a single speech in French. What if I told you that while Trump is busy igniting a global trade war, Canada, yes, Canada just delivered a diplomatic strike that could reshape the Western alliance permanently. Let's rewind to a speech made just days ago by Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney in Toronto, barely covered by American media, yet quietly echoing through the halls of global power a 30-cond message delivered. Purposefully in French, which wasn't just aimed at Canadians, it was a direct shot across Washington's bow. Canada can work towards a new international set of partnerships that are more secure, prosperous, just and free. We can pursue deeper alliances with stable democracies who share our interests, values, principles and history, and we can help create a new era of integration between like-minded partners that maximizes mutual support over mutual dependency. Let that sink in. Mutual support over mutual dependency. That's not just poetic, it's strategic. What Carney is saying here, without naming names, is that America can no longer be trusted as a reliable partner. And if you think this is just Canada talking, think again. Europe is watching, Australia is watching. And if we're honest, America's credibility has been slowly burning since April 2nd, 2025. When Trump launched his global tariff war in the name of America. First, Trump imposed sweeping tariffs on allies and adversaries alike, aluminum, steel, electronics, even agricultural imports. But what did it? Lead to retaliation, isolation. And now for the first time in decades, even Canada is saying, enough, this isn't just economic divergence, it's geopolitical divorce. And Carney didn't leave it vague. He framed it as the end of America's predominant role in world affairs since the Second World War. Canada has asserted its independence. Increasingly, we distanced ourselves from the United Kingdom and developed closer ties with the United States. We were by the side of the United States throughout the Cold War and in the decades that followed. When the United States played a predominant role on the world stage today, that predominance is a thing of the past. This is the line that changes everything. A U.S. ally, your peaceful, reliable northern neighbor, just publicly declared the era of American dominance over. And yet almost no one in America noticed. But we're only scratching the surface because what Carney said next? Well, that's where the real shift begins. So why did Mark Carney choose French for the most powerful message of his career? That's not just a language choice. That isn't the easiest language for most Americans to understand. And maybe that's the point. Because while Carney was speaking to the world, he wasn't looking to start a shouting match with Trump. He was laying out Canada's future without Washington's permission. But just because it was soft-spoken doesn't mean it wasn't loud. Carney made it crystal clear. Canada is done being economically chained to a country that's spiraling into tariff tantrums and unpredictable leadership under Trump. America has become a trading partner that punishes. Allies weaponizes economics and calls it strategy. But the world isn't buying it anymore literally and figuratively. He then goes on to say that we can form new partnerships and says, and I quote, "We can form deeper alliances with more stable democracies." This is a profound thing for a Canadian Prime Minister to say in a speech. When Mark Carney speaks, he carefully chooses his words, and he's speaking directly to the United States here. That line stings because the phrase "more stable" says it all. Carney didn't call out Trump by name, but couldn't be darker. Canada is no longer placing its bets on Washington's leadership. It's turning toward Europe, toward countries that still believe in cooperation, in respect insanity, but Carney didn't stop there. He moved straight into what might be the boldest economic shift in Canada's modern history, an aggressive increase in military spending. Now, at first glance, that might sound like a standard NATO announcement, but when you peel back the layers, it's something much bigger. He pointed to a serious problem. Canada's military is under-equipped, submarines aren't ready. Less than half of their maritime and land vehicles are operational. But instead of begging America for support, Carney is doing something unexpected. He's building independence. 10 years ago, Canada's defence spending fell to less than 1% of GDP. It has since doubled in cash terms, but is still not close enough to face these mounting risks. The brave women and men who are protecting our sovereignty do not have the resources they need for a riskier world. Our military infrastructure and equipment have aged, hindering our military preparedness. I give an example or two. Only one of our 4 submarines is seaworthy. Less than half our maritime fleet and land vehicles are operational. More broadly, we're too reliant on the United States. And so for all those reasons, I'm announcing today that Canada will achieve NATO's 2% of GDP target this year, half a decade ahead of schedule. Now pause and think about this while Trump is slapping tariffs and damaging alliances. Canada is stepping up its game not by becoming more dependent on the U.S., but by becoming more independent from it. That's not just military budgeting, that's a realignment of trust, and trust once broken rarely returns for decades. The US nudged Canada to spend more on defense, but Trump's erratic behavior turned that request into a demand, then into a threat. Now Carney is flipping the script. Yes, Canada will spend more, but not to please Washington. They'll do it to protect themselves from Washington if needed. What comes next takes this message even further into trade industry, and the one place Trump never expected: to lose ground defense manufacturing. When we think of military power, we often imagine missiles, jets, and tanks, but there's another battlefield, one that's quieter, but just as critical: the business of defense. And this is where Carney's message hits hardest, because for decades the US didn't just sell weapons to allies, it depended on them to buy American billions of dollars in fighter jet contracts, surveillance tech, and cyber defense systems flowed into American corporations like Lockheed Martin and Raytheon and Canada. Canada was always the loyal customer. Until now, in his speech, Mark Carney revealed something that should have shaken Washington to its core. Canada is no longer blindly buying US military equipment. In fact, they're exploring alternatives for the first time in a generation. One of America's closest allies is considering walking away from a nearly $80 billion defense deal. And as reported on a CBC News article here about a month ago, Canada is now actively looking at potential alternatives to the US-built F-35. The remarks from our then defense Minister Bill Blair came a couple of days after Portugal signalled that it was planning to ditch its acquisition of the high-tech warplane. This happened a little over a month ago, when Mark Carney directed the defence minister to look at alternatives. Let's pause there. This isn't just about jets, this is about trust. The F-35 program is one of America's most advanced and most expensive military exports. But Carney is saying we're not sure we want it anymore. Why? Because depending on an unstable trade partner during a global trade war is a risk no smart country is willing to take. And Trump's tariffs made that risk undeniable recently. Trump slapped massive new tariffs on aluminum and steel imports, including from Canada, the same materials that go into fighter jets. Warships and military infrastructure. Think about it. How can Canada keep buying defense products from a country that's actively attacking its economy? So now Canada is doing what any responsible government would do, rethinking its dependencies, owning and operating a fleet of F-35 fighter jets over the next 4.5 decades is expected to cost Canadian taxpayers $73 billion, and all of those costs would basically be direct transfers from the Canadian government to the United States defense industry. Just this one deal on the fighter jets represents $80 billion to the American economy. That's not defense spending anymore. That's a lifeline to US industries, and it's a lifeline Canada is ready to cut instead of handing over their taxpayers' money. To Washington, Carney is exploring European alternatives like Sweden's Saab Grip and fighter jets and redirecting investment back into Canadian hands. More Canadian factories, more Canadian jobs, more Canadian sovereignty. It's a bold move and it sends a crystal clear signal under Trump. The US is no longer viewed as a partner. It's being treated like a competitor, and worse, a volatile one. Canada's economic response isn't loud, it isn't chaotic, it's precise, disciplined, and much more dangerous in the long run, because when a country like Canada decides to stop fueling your economy, you're in real trouble. Let's talk. Numbers Canada's defense budget. Thanks to this new shift is about to hit 2% of GDP. That's tens of billions of dollars every year for decades. 70% to 80% of that money flowed straight to American defense contractors. It was easy money Washington pushed and Canada paid, but under Trump that cozy deal is unraveling. So Canada's defense spending budget, something like between 70 and 80% of it, represent a direct transfer of Canadian government money into the US economy. So here's what Mark Carney is doing, and it's to American firms he is investing it back into Canada. He's centralizing the Defense Procurement Agency, building a local supply chain, and using this moment to supercharge Canadian industries from steel and aluminum to cyber defense and rare minerals. The Defense Procurement Agency will centralize decision. We will ensure that Canadian workers and businesses benefit from the huge increase in defense procurement that will be required using Canadian steel, Canadian aluminum, Canadian critical minerals, Canadian cyber. Let's be real. This isn't just about protecting Canada's borders. This is about building a new kind of economic independence. Trump's tariffs hurt Canadian industries, so now instead of begging for relief, Carney is bypassing the US, completely creating demand at home, with jobs and infrastructure that won't vanish every time Trump sends a tweet. And while Trump stirs chaos, Carney offers clarity. While Trump punishes partners, Carney empowers them. And while Trump's Eddie trade war is wrecking trust, Carney is building alliances with Europe, Australia, the UK, and others who are tired of being treated like enemies for trying to trade fairly. But here's the most chilling part for Washington. This shift could become contagious. Other countries are watching if Canada can boost its defense, grow its economy, and escape US dependency all at once. Why wouldn't they follow? That's why Carney's plan isn't just about jets or factories, it's about showing the world there's life and success outside of Trump's. Trump's America has become a wild card, unpredictable, unstable, and increasingly aggressive. Toward its own allies, Carney didn't say it directly, but his message was loud enough to echo across oceans. And now others are starting to listen. We can pursue deeper alliances with stable democracies who share our interests, values, principles, and history. Those words aren't about friendship, they're about detachment. Carney is signaling the end of the American world order. And for many, it's long overdue under Trump. America hasn't been a leader, it's been a bully, slapping tariffs on friends, threatening global institutions, and turning international diplomacy into a business negotiation. But here's the twist. No one saw coming. Countries are adapting fast. Canada's looking to Sweden for fighter jets. Europe is strengthening internal trade. Australia is investing in regional defense alliances and behind closed doors. More leaders are asking the same question. Why depend on someone who keeps turning the table over? Trump's trade war, launched in April 2025, was supposed to make America stronger. Instead, it made the rest of the world smarter. Allies no longer trust. Washington's mood swings. They're building their own networks, creating new deals, and strengthening each other, not out of spite, but out of necessity. Meanwhile, what's happening inside America? Factories are losing contracts. Defense giants are quietly lobbying behind the scenes, and Trump's administration is too busy tweeting victories to notice the slow-motion exit of its partners. What Carney offered wasn't just a speech, it was a pivot point in history, a move away from reliance, a move toward a world where the US doesn't automatically sit at the head of every table, and for a country built on alliances that should be terrifying. Canada's going to spend more on its military. They're going to try and achieve the 2% target earlier. Well, that's true, but the more profound thing was how we're going to shift from cooperating with the United States to cooperating more with other countries. And here's the final truth: empires don't fall overnight. They fall when their allies stop believing in them, and in 2025, that belief is fading faster than anyone in Washington is willing to admit. So while Trump continues to play power games, other nations quietly, confidently are walking away from the table. And if no one in America wakes up soon, we'll all realize too late the world has already moved on.